I'm gonna do a little intro first. Okay, well, welcome to episode 2 of Gumshoe Studios. This is my second episode. This is a work in progress. We're putting together these podcasts to discuss. So, two of my favorite things, right? I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 25 years. I love the life of service, and I love old movies. And I want to interview people that also live a life of service and get them to talk about old movies. Maybe they don't necessarily like old movies the way I do, but I think there's a connection there. So I want to introduce my second guest on Gumshoe Studios, Angel Rivera, who is the Vice President of Youth Development for the Boys and Girls Clubs. Angel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Luis, thank you. An honor to be your second guest on your second podcast. So thank you for inviting me. So Angel Rivera, as he said, VP of Youth Development for Boys and Girls Clubs Chicago. I've been doing this work for 20 plus years now. Started in direct service with youth, every day after school programming, homework assistance, doing recreational things in the gym and different settings. So this is the work I loved. I've grown to love. Thought I wanted to be a teacher out of high school. Thought I wanted to teach history because I do love history. And then, along the lines of when I was in school, just cabined along this place, somebody said, hey, I was looking for a job. They were looking to hire. They hired me, and I haven't looked back since. And 20 years climbing the ladder, and here I am as a VP of Youth Development, and I'm pretty much overseeing all of our 8 sites throughout Chicagoland. Again, just ensuring that we're providing the best possible, after-school programs and mentorship and relationship building with our youth from all our communities that we serve. So.
Well, you answered the first question. I was like, how long have you been? So 20 years. And full disclosure, Angel and I first met 20 years ago when similar stories. I worked for the Boys and Girls Club almost 20 some odd years ago, and got to know each other. Then went back and we became fast friends, and just really enjoyed my time there when I was there. I've always loved the Boys and Girls Club. I mean, it was really my first real job.
Yep.
Out of college, and I never even thought that I'd work with youth and live a life of service. So,
and the fun fact is, right, I met you worked at the Little Village Boys and Girls Club, which 10, 15 years later, I became the director of that club before right. I ascended to my current position. So full circle kind of, right?
Yeah. So as Angel and I are working together, I've always talked about old movies and my passion for old movies. And so let's before we get started, so you grew up. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, mainly Brighton Park area, or right by Kelly High School, California, Archer location. Actually spent a few years in Texas. So I would say from 80 to 85, I was in Texas. And probably about, what would I have been, 10, 11, we moved back to Chicago. I mean, Kelly Park was my backyard for a while, right? I used to go back there and play football with all my friends. So again, that's essentially where I grew up. But I moved around. I stayed there for a little bit, but I've moved around. I've lived by Humboldt Park. I've lived in Pilsen. So quite a few communities that I've been in.
Right. And do you feel that it informs the work that you do since you've kind of moved around?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and it's weird because I wasn't really exposed to Little Village until probably high school, late in high school, right? So Little Village, that community was, such a hardcore Mexican-American, culturally vibrant. When I grew up in Brighton Park, it was still mixed. It was Polish, Lithuanian folks still living there. So again, just to, experience that later on, in high school during, a strong, adolescent period, it was great. And again, definitely, because I didn't know gangs till I moved to Chicago, right? I was younger in Texas, small town. And so again, having that experience, racial inequities even, right? Like I went to high school at Jones, so we used to go downtown and shop and do stuff like that. And those are probably the first times that I experienced some of those things, firsthand, right? People following you in a store at back then Marshall Field's, now Macy's, right? We'd go there and have, all the salespeople follow you around. So I think it was definitely a cultural shock for me coming from a small town in Texas to Chicago. And then again, just, seeing the different dynamics of a somewhat diverse neighborhood, then, having friends and really being part of that Little Village culture, it opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I wasn't aware of.
What high school did you go to?
So I started at De La Salle. So I went to De La Salle my freshman and sophomore year, and then I finished at Jones. So I graduated from Jones my junior, senior year. I was at Jones. So
Nice. And you're married, right? With 4 kids.
4 kids, yeah. So we started the family, and then we had 2 boys. I have 2 boys. One's in college, Miami, Ohio. He just started there this year. His younger brother's a sophomore at St. Ignatius, And then, 10 years ago, we said, hey, let's go for the third, and then we'll call it quits. And we ended up with twin girls. So I have my beautiful twin daughters, Itzel and Liana. So they're in 6th grade right now. And so, yeah, still working through that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you met your wife at the Boys and Girls Club, right? You guys worked together.
Well, not initially. I mean, we met for the first time outside of work, but I think I guess you could say the romance began kind of in a Boys and Girls Club setting. She started working at the True Value Club. Back then it was General Wood, right there on 25th in Sacramento. She got hired for a short time, and yeah, we kind of hit it off there, but I think we both decided like, hey, we're cool, but the work thing, dynamic, we were concerned with, right? We didn't want to just kind of jump into anything. And so when she left, she ended up getting a job at Benito Juarez High School. And once she took off and did that, I think the romance and the relationship really started to kind of grow from there. We had a little bit more breathing room, if you want to say, right?
So then Boys and Girls Club is just not just about like work, but it's kind of also kind of giving you this other kind of life, right? I think to a certain extent.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I met the mother of my children, my future wife there. So yeah, absolutely. Boys and Girls Club has been a big, most of my adult life has been in Boys and Girls Clubs, experiencing things with them. So absolutely.
And seeing, I mean, the youth development, because we're going to go into the movie in the next minute or so, but the idea of all youth are at risk, right? But there's also like a higher level of youth at risk that live in these lower income neighborhoods and these working class neighborhoods. And so, what has that been like? 20 years, probably a ton of success stories, but also probably some heartache too, right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Like you said, I think for sure success stories, right? I think you do this for 20 years. I used to coach volleyball at the General Wood Club, and there's still girls from that team who see me. And again, success in life is defined in so many different ways, right? Like some are great, career professionals. I think one young lady is working for Teachers for America. I think she has a high level position there. Others are just moms. They're moms, stay-at-home moms, but they're great moms raising wonderful families. So again, defining success is, there's different ways to define success in life. And so very proud of those moments. But yeah, like you said, there's always the unfortunate people that kind of fall through the cracks that you hear later, right? That, had a tough time, maybe went down the wrong path. But again, you're not going to bat 1,000, unfortunately, in this work, right? Because there's just so many circumstances that you're fighting, right? Like so many socioeconomic circumstances that you're fighting, factors, family factors, trauma. Again, so you're not going to bat 1,000, but all you can do is be there, right? You show up every day, you do the work, and hopefully things turn out all right, right?
Yeah, that's all you can hope for. And I think probably I would safe to say that you being in these kids' lives, you've probably shaped and maybe somebody was on this path, but you were able to kind of maneuver them into a more positive path. I think any kind of positivity, right, goes a long way. I think you can't underscore that. I'm just going to punch up really quick the film because I want to make sure I capture some points. So I apologize. So going into the movie Dead End, right, with Humphrey Bogart. It stars Humphrey Bogart, Joe McCrea, Sylvia Sidney. Now, everybody I think would know who Humphrey Bogart is. Mm-hmm. And Joe McCrea is also a character actor from the 1930s and 40s. Sylvia Sidney's real claim to fame is she's the old lady in Beetlejuice who waits at the as everybody's entering hell. She's the one kind of directing everything. That's really, but she was also in this film, and she's pretty great in this film.
Sorry, remind me. Sylvia was which character? Was that Drina?
She's the one that plays Drina. Yes. Look at you. This is a guy who swore he would never watch an old black and white movie.
Don't like him.
So, tell me. So this movie really, it kind of centers around like a couple of themes, right? Gentrification, which is nothing new, right? The rich, the poor are congregated in one area that's not considered important until the rich come and see value in it and begin to build, right? These buildings pop up and the wealthy are butting up against the poor. And at the same time, there's a love story. Joe McCrea is an out-of-work architect who's sort of in love with a woman who is kind of wealthy and kind of in between her and this other guy. Then there's Humphrey Bogart, who is babyface. God, I can't remember what his name. Babyface Martin. That's right. He plays Babyface Martin, and he comes back to his own neighborhood because he has gotten plastic surgery because he's hiding out in his own neighborhood. and he's coming back to kind of relive. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
Wants to see his mom. He wants to see his girlfriend, and through a series of scenes, he's
Yeah.
so disappointed.
I
And then there's his
kind of took
kids.
it as, sorry to interrupt you. I kind of took it as validation. Like he was looking for validation in some way, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, I think we all know that when he was obviously successful, probably not choosing making the best decisions, right, in life. But again, you still look for validation, right, from your mom, from the people you grew up with. So yeah, that's kind of how I took it. He was really looking
No,
for some
no, no.
validation.
That's great. Tell me, yeah. And then he encounters his one true love, who unfortunately is a prostitute and has syphilis, and that this one thing he was kind of hoping for also disintegrates right before his eyes. This kind of thing that he was imagining. So let's get into it. Your thoughts on the movie? Tell me what were your first impressions?
Yeah, well, again, I obviously came in a little skeptical, as you said. I'm not, not a big black and white movie fan. But again, I actually was pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed it more than I thought it would, right? I thought the plot was great. The story was great. I think, as an urban kid growing up in this situation, seeing gentrification, right? Like I'm sure like you have, right, in different communities in Chicago, that plot storyline really hit home. And so again, I immediately, I was kind of already engaged, right? I already saw that, it was even humorous, right? To see kind of the big divide, these rich folks dancing and partying in this big ivory tower. And then all of a sudden, 10, 20 feet away, the shady neighborhood with all these, people going through socioeconomic, distress.
Huddling over an open fire
Yeah.
and trying to stay warm while
Yeah.
these people are continuously playing music and dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, that dichotomy was very it was interesting. And so again, really enjoyed the movie. I've always kind of liked that film noir kind of genre, right? So that already interested me right away, right? The bright colors of, the rich side, and then the dark kind of shady where, all the folks on that side of the neighborhood are kind of just coming in out of the shadows, kind of, right? Like living their lives. And so again, really caught my eyes, right? Humphrey Bogart was great. I thought he was my favorite character, just the way he presented himself, that gangster kind of feel. Again, growing up in Latino communities, you always know the gangsters, right? The guys who walk around really confident and stuff like that. But in the end, you kind of see, some of that confidence erode. But, I guess we'll get to that a little bit later. Again, I know my favorite line for him was, I think they were in the bar and with his other friend, I can't remember his name. And he's upset. He's like, you know what, go get yourself a drink, but, anywhere but here or something like that, right? So he's essentially telling his little stooge to like, get out of here, right? Like, I need to be alone. So again, just the way he carried himself.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, he kind of carried the movie for me. So yeah.
Really? Okay. I thought Sylvia Sidney for me was the glue to the movie, because here's his sister trying to keep her brother out of out of problems and out of gain. How many families did we deal with where like you had siblings who really took over the parental role because they were the older ones? That's the thing that really stuck to me. What did you think about that relationship between the sister and the brother trying to keep him out of and no matter what she did, he was just gonna always get in trouble because there was nothing she could really do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that really struck home about the whole like the nature versus nurture kind of discussion, right? Like you said, right? She's at home trying to be a good role model to him, really teach him, and again, even some of the stories behind her, right? She was on strike. They never really said what she did, but she was on strike. She was out of work, right? So you could tell, someone with principles, values, and again, just trying to keep this young kid off the streets and trying to get a better life for him. So again, definitely, like you said, parallels, right? I think we see a lot of that, especially in brown and black communities where, the village raises you, right? Parents aren't there, then the next person steps up to kind of step into that role, right? But again, while I thought it was interesting, for me, I guess the dynamic of Humphrey Bogart's character succeeding in his own way, his own path, and coming back, for me, was really kind of the through line through that of like, how do you get out of this circumstance? And usually it's only through crime, right? Like that's kind of a pretty common theme in low-income communities, right? Like, how do you make it out of there? It's really some sort of crime-related occupation, breaking the law, right? And so, because again, even at the end, she kind of struggled, right? Like she never really found her footing. So again, for me, that Humphrey Bogart character really was like the through line of, how do I put this, right? So like, how do, being successful, trying to get yourself out of that situation and, making tough decisions to do that, right? And she chose her values, she chose her principles, and Humphrey Bogart, not so much, right? He chose a different path.
And then if you flip it, where the Joe McCreary character, who was this auto work architect who went to school, got an education, and is ended up painting signs on the window for a store shop owner, and this is kind of how he spends his days, just trying to make ends meet. I think there's a real thing there about like education versus, especially in our neighborhoods, right? Like where we came up, right? The guy going to college isn't as
Yeah.
revered as the guy who's the gangster who's out there doing stuff and hustling and trying to make it. They're both trying to make it, but one's trying to do it. One, I think, one is a long term investment in education and knowing that it's going to work out someday. Where this one, I think a lot of these movies have this thing where like they are just living for today.
Hmm.
There's no like tomorrow plan or next week plan or retirement plan, right? I don't know. What do you think of that kind of dichotomy between the two?
Yeah, well, again, I think the theme of the movie, right? Like the socioeconomic things, right? Again, I think it's how do you get to that finish line faster, right? And I think sometimes, education isn't valued in these communities, right? And, in these low income communities. So for me, it was definitely, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the architect guy, I think to me, I can even admit wasn't my favorite character either, right? Like I appreciated him, but again, like I don't know what was it, his affinity for that rich lady, I don't know, rubbed me the wrong
Yeah,
way. Again,
yeah,
he had this great girl right in front of him who was obviously interested, but like again, he had these, visions of grandeur, right? Like he saw himself in that lifestyle with her. But again, and it kind of makes you overlook, sometimes what's right in front of you, right? So again, he didn't strike me as my favorite character. But again, the parallels of education, and I've been accused of, I'm sure as you have, right? You get educated, maybe you don't speak the broken slang anymore, and again, you kind of get shit talked a little bit by some of your peers because
oh yeah.
you sold out or whatever, right? So it's a tough road to travel, right? That like you said, the dichotomy of living on both sides, where up to this point, probably a lot of that stuff, getting education was considered more white, right? And if you're not,
Mhm.
if you're down for your hood and all that, you're not maybe really trying to do that, right? You're just down for your hood and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely a strange dichotomy to kind of have to balance as a brown or a black person, right? So
And then this movie also introduces the East Side Boys or the Bowery Boys,
hmm
which is they're a group of kids that are just kind of running. It's sort of like the Lord of the Flies, right? They're just kind of running around doing whatever, and it's survival of the fittest. And there are other. I might do a series on the Bowery Boys and the Dead End Kids. They have different names, but it's a group of young actors that become sort of like that becomes their kind of thing in other movies. Do you see? Can you see some parallels or some connections between like street gangs? So these kids, kind of the interpretation of gangs in this movie as opposed to like real life. Where do you see that? Where do you see those connections? And because right, I mean, I think at the Boys and Girls Club coming up, we dealt with a lot of kids who ended up joining gangs or they were in a gang or there's a struggle. What do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, again, yeah, I think you can draw those through lines through it, right? Because again, it's what I've noticed, and I think we read a lot, right? Is why do young men join gangs or women, right? It's that sense of family, right? They're not getting it at home. They need some sort of something to identify with, and I think that's what these young men got in each other, right? They got together. They came from the same circumstances. That us against them kind of attitude, I think, bonded them through together. And again, and I think you even get into some of that group think, right, where you excuse, the behaviors, the crime, if you want to say, right, because again, you're just surviving. You've kind of rationalized your survival through that lens, right? So again, I think as we've done in our work, right, you see that, right? You see these kids come in. It's about status. It's about feeling like they mean something in that community, right? And even though they're getting that, they're kind of maybe negative kind of ways of getting to that that status. But again, it's what else are they going to do, right? They don't know live some of that stuff, especially in our work, at least is generational, right? These kids are in generations of gang life and violence and things like that. So again, I did find it comical in the movie, right? Because it's a little cheesy, right? 1937. I think I mentioned this before. It's a bunch of probably white kids running around, right? If that was more accurate, you probably would have seen some different people there. But again, you can still connect the dots, right? I mean, obviously, those kids are looking for family, they're looking for connection, and they're looking to survive. And I think they come together to kind of give each other that to an extent, right?
Yeah, whether again, I think you touched upon that. Sometimes, for better for worse, positive or negative, it's all they have, right?
Yeah.
This is what I have, right? Um, and then there's the movie takes a turn, right, where like um, Humphrey Bogart's character and Joe McCrea's character, even though they grew up together, they knew each other from childhood. They become adversaries, right? And it becomes this tense moment where um, the architect character is going to go to the police and say you're here because he's running around doing all kinds of. You could see kind of this build up from Robert Brooks right there, like he is ready. You can also, I mean, you could also even think about it as there's a mental health crisis going on there too, isn't there? Right? He changed his face because he gets plastic, so no one can recognize him. He's obviously much handsomer, but he's sort of like it's all just a facade, right? It's like
Mhm.
there's no like real. You could see the struggle in his face when he realizes his mom rejects him. He goes to see his mom. I made it. I have money now. And she's like, "Get out of here! I don't want to see you. I reject you." Which I think has got to be devastating for any child. For any, it doesn't matter how old you are, but when your parent rejects you, that's got to be devastating. What do you think about that scene where the
Yeah.
mom rejects him? And I do think that at one point when he's sitting at the bar, I think he's really having a moment where he is just a broken person.
Agreed. Agreed. No, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's why I mentioned earlier, for me, it was validation, right? Like he made it in his mind. I got money. I got, a good suit on, jewelry. I'm going to come back to this neighborhood, to show off. Right. And so I think it truly, like you said, it broke him when his mom rejected him in that scenario. But again, and even going back and sorry, I can't remember the architect's name again. What was that character?
His name was, give me a second here. His name was Dave. Joe
Yeah.
McCrea.
Yeah.
Dave
And,
McConnell.
yeah, for me, it was really interesting there, that relationship, as you mentioned, because again, I could almost see Dave as obviously they're both from the community, but like just two different sides of it, right? Like you could tell that Humphrey Bogart's character, he's probably used to being the man wherever he goes, right? Like, you step into a party, you're the man, everybody looks up to you because you're wearing all the fancy clothes, and then he comes back to his community and he's just looked down on, right? Well, I was, Dave to me had a higher standing. I think everybody respected him,
There was a
you know.
depth there, right?
Yeah,
There was
absolutely. So I mean, to me, it almost was like your typical kind of community organizer, someone who, good and bad, they love their community, right? And they want to correct the bad, right? They're sticking around, they're not going anywhere because they want to correct the bad, but they love their community and the other positive things about it. And again, Humphrey Bogart's character to me was kind of that prime example of probably a love-hate relationship with that community, right? With your family, where you hate the circumstances, you hate being poor. So again, you take this path to success, almost leave,
for
right? Like
perceived
you're like, yeah,
success, right?
yeah, you leave, I'm out of here, like I made it, and then you come back looking for this validation and you don't get it, right? And like you said, I think that definitely broke him, and I think that's where you saw that spiral towards negativity, right? Like he was almost itching to commit a crime, right? It was almost like the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if you think I'm a bad guy, then I'll just be a bad guy, right?
I'll
So
be that guy. Yeah.
yeah.
But I also think that I'll be the first to admit that I lived in a neighborhood that was very tightly knit back in the 80s and 90s, and when gentrification took hold, everybody split. But there is a moment there, like I think a few years ago, I went back because I hadn't been back there since, and you romanticize. And if you've never been in a community like that, like I think it's hard for I think some people nowadays to realize, especially in the city, because everyone's so transient, right? They move from place to place to grow up in a neighborhood where everybody knew each other. You knew everybody at the corner store. You knew people at the supermarket, Goldblatt's, which people probably don't even know what that is, right? If we talk about it, the
Yeah.
different, and everything was there. You wouldn't have to leave your community ever. That also, like, I think going back, I think Humphrey Bogart's character going back there to find that sense of self
Hmm.
is what I think it was for him. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, because did you ever go back to a place and realize it's not what I remember it was, and it's not? I made it something larger or something more, and it's really not. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever experienced anything like that, but I hear what you're saying. But like I said, I think it was definitely a sense of self, right? But I think through that it was, also acceptance, right? Like I think, I mean, as much as he escaped the community, Humphrey Bogart's character, I think, still loved it, right? And he wanted to go back there and kind of be the king again, right? And so, again, I think that's why it broke him so much that like he got rejected immediately. That, like you said, the girlfriend he went looking for because again, he made strong connections there, right? I mean, he remembered this girl after whatever 15, 20 years. and tried to go back there essentially to, lift her up with him. And right, he was severely disappointed by what he found. Again, you see all the social norms there, right? Like she was a tainted woman, and so of course he couldn't pursue a romantic relationship with her. So you see a lot of the social norms there of that time as well, right? So, but again, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it was like you said, a sense of self, but I think it was a combination of that with like again, just coming back and feeling like people should admire him, right? Like he's an accomplished man, and people should admire him. And what and again, people didn't, right? Like they saw him as a criminal, as a bad person, and that's just an image he could never escape, right? Even after the facelift and all that.
Sure, sure. But let me ask you a question. I mean, I think the saddest character in this whole story is Francine, the prostitute, right? I mean, she's just trying to survive and make ends meet, and she really is the that's really heartbreaking for me because you know I think she was really in love with Babyface Martin. I think they really loved each other, but Babyface Martin's pride and even her own self, like I'm tainted. You can't be with me because it alludes to her being sick, and it's syphilis. She has syphilis, and that's sort of like that was it. And
Yeah, see,
after you
that's
couldn't even
my
kiss her, right?
unfamiliarity with those old movies, right? I couldn't pick up on that. I was like, obviously, I picked up on it, but like for me, it was like, you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, you're used to more modern films where that's just made a little bit more, obvious to the viewer, right? So it was kind of funny to me to kind of see it portrayed that way, right? Where it was very subtle. So I think you froze on me, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, go back real quick. Yeah, we froze.
Oh, you're freezing again.
Can you hear me? No, can you
Yeah,
hear me?
yeah, I got you.
Okay. Go back to what you were saying real quick, like just because I think we lost that.
Oh no, yeah, I was just saying again, just me not being familiar with this, old classic films like that, because again, it was initially I was like, "What do you mean she's tainted?" Because again, I mean, she was a good-looking woman to me on the screen, right? But again, and I was reading that as well that they had a censorship board, right? Like I guess the movie industry themselves made this censorship board to prevent the government from coming in and doing it, right? So they had to do everything very, innuendo, very subtle. They couldn't just come out and
Mhm.
display prostitution and heavy kissing and lusting and things like that. So again, I get it. It's a sign of the times, right? But again, I just thought it was a little weird that from me and my perspective, this perfectly good-looking, attractive woman, had lived this tragic life, right? It was hard to see from the eye. You just kind of had to go with the story and go with the plot a little bit, right? So
Yeah. What was challenging about watching this movie? What were the challenges for you?
yeah, again, and again, not to insult anybody, but again, I think to me the acting is a little campy, except for like Humphrey Bogart's character to me again because he's that gangster. For me, that's just what I have a hard time kind of getting over. Again, that's just my humble opinion that sometimes
Mhm.
the acting can be a little campy. The Bowery Boys, the Dead End Boys, with kind of their exaggerated kind of New York accents, a little bit
Mhm.
was a bit tough. But again, overall, the movie was entertaining. It was easy to look past that stuff because it was a good movie.
Okay, and that's my next question. Did it connect with you at some level? And what level was that? Like, where did it connect for you exactly? I know you see Humphrey Bogart, but
Yeah.
the movie itself, it does play out like a play because there really isn't a main character. It's just a set of people in this environment because you had to remember the rich kid too, the kid who got jumped
Yeah.
and got stuff taken from him.
Yeah.
That's a whole other kind of like, and then the big climactic scene where Dave, the architect, and baby they get into a fight and it's
Yep.
basically a shootout. At the end, which I I personally, I guess it makes sense, but it also felt like it was kind of thrown in there. Like
Mhm.
there had to be some kind of ending for the Humphrey Bogart character. There was no other way for him to go. What were your thoughts on that? So think about the ending and how
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, actually, I really liked the ending. I thought that was essentially how a character, babyface Martin, to me, that's the epitome of his life, right? Like, so again, he was successful through violence. He was someone who profited from violence and living a violent life. So again, it was, it just seemed fitting that kind of he would go out that way, right? And again, at the hands of someone from his community, somebody who knew growing up, who obviously highly disagreed with his lifestyle. As you said, was constantly questioning him throughout the movie. Hey, what's going on? If you don't get out of here, we're going to call the cops on you, right? So again, someone who you could see as almost like a guardian of that community, high morals, high values, kind of takes out the bad guy in the end, right? So, it made sense in kind of that cinematic kind of way, right? So.
And then Dave ends up with Sydney, and they end up, that's a very Hollywood ending, like they
Well, yeah,
brought it
didn't
together.
he get the reward? Didn't he get the 4K for taking out Babyface Martin? So
he becomes a hero in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right, because he thought he was going to go to jail.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it turned out differently. So I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you're able to find these parallels. Any other thoughts? Anything else? Any kind of research that you found interesting while you were watching the movie? Go ahead.
So no, I mean, for me, like you said, I think one of the reasons I connected to it, and I'm sure you would think the same thing, Luis, is obviously we're from Chicago, we're from an urban setting, right? And although I know I did read that they didn't film it in New York, it was all sets in California. But even though, right, like I think growing up in that setting, there was a lot of parallels, right? Like I think I really like the interaction with Drina's character and the cop, right? When the cop is, I forgot the context of the conversation, but essentially she's saying, "Why should I trust you? You're a cop." You know what I'm saying? And so again, I mean, I think that's still very true today, right? Like our communities, our Black and brown communities have tough relationships with cops, and I think it's safe to say that our law enforcement probably looks out more for the wealthy and affluential folks in our society more than they do for people who are not in that population, right? So again, to me, there was a lot of just parallels even today that you connect to, right? Like the American dream, as they call it, right? And seeing how it's easily accessible to some folks, but not to others, right? As again, I think I mentioned you before, if you can build up wealth, especially generational wealth, that just allows you to have this social mobility that nobody else has, right? You can say, I want to live here now, and all right, I'm sick of being here, now let me go take over this situation, gentrification, all that. So again, to me, it's amazing to see how many societal problems, especially with discrepancies in wealth and differences in class and all that still exists today, right? And so for me, that was very interesting. That a lot of those things are still very, very prominent today in today's society. So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. Two things that I want to touch upon real quick. I think what you said is kind of true. Like this idea where like the idea of law enforcement that's supposed to protect and serve all of us gets some people get the benefit of that to serve and protect versus others, right? Those who have money in the movie, especially, right? They were more concerned about making sure these kids didn't disturb these wealthy folks, right? Because they're all obviously well connected, and they're all kind of connected somehow to something higher, and they're all kind of scared, like I don't want to get in trouble. And then another thing that you said that stuck with me. My daughter knocked on the door, so it kind of threw me off. This idea of the American dream. And it's very visual there, right? Well, they're at the bottom warming potatoes, trying to figure out how to cook these potatoes, these kids. And they're all at that tower. They're all partying and drinking and having a great time. And they're sort of like, what do they have to laugh and dance about? Like, even when they at this point where they're all mimicking, like they can't figure out why these people are always laughing and dancing all the time. It seems like so strange to them because, dang, we're hungry, That also stuck with me too.
Absolutely. And even I think it was towards the end or in the middle of the movie, even kind of sometimes the self-righteousness of sometimes of the wealthy, right? Where she's pleading with that guy, hey, take it easy on my brother. And the guy's saying, oh, I have to do what's right. Like, we're going to let the law decide. And again, I think it's very easy for people who don't struggle, who don't do that to say, sorry, we're just going to let the law kind of play out and not understanding the struggle. And sometimes, you make decisions for survival, right? It's not that you're a bad person. It's about survival sometimes, right? And so again, I think, what money and wealth in this country kind of affords you, right, to me, was very symbolic right there.
And you see it playing out now more than ever. Yeah. You would think, if you go way back to 1937, and that can't be happening now, but you see it every day, right? You see this kind of play on wealth and how the wealthy, and then the self-righteous of the wealthy, like, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, that's easy to say if you're like a third or fourth generation where your great-great-grandfather made a ton of money, and your starting line is at that tower where it's for some of us it's down in that alley in that East End slum,
Yep.
and so we see a lot of that. I hear, I think about that too in terms of how we view the working poor or the working class, right? It's a real, and then even now, some people who are working class and who are working poor vote against their own interest because they see the wealth and they, oh well, they
Hmm.
must be doing something right, so let's just do whatever they're doing without seeing the consequences. Like, wait, that's you're not seeing. I can talk about, we can get into politics, talk about that person in the White House
Yeah.
who had generational wealth and didn't really pull himself up by the bootstraps. I'm talking about his great grandfather built wealth and how he built that wealth, right? We forget, like, how did you, like
Yeah.
everyone reveres the Kennedys, but his father was a bootlegger.
Hmm.
That's how he
Hmm.
made his money. He was
Yeah.
a glorified drug dealer in his,
Absolutely.
and yet that the wealth begins to wash away your sins, right? And you know how you
Yeah,
make money.
and I really feel like, especially, it's exacerbated, right? I mean, you saw that that depicted in this film, right? But to me, it's only gotten worse, right? I think, again, the disparities, between the wealthy and the poor have just increased, right? I mean, today, I don't know what that is, right? But all that wealth is accumulated at the top, and none of it's trickling down, right? And so, again, I think it's very, easy for people at the top to just, be judgmental, and and almost, again, rationalize their own behavior, right? They're exploiting labor, they're exploiting, all these resources for their own benefit. They're hoarding this wealth, but yet they want to look down on, working class people for just trying to survive, right? So, again, I think it's a very convenient argument for them sometimes, right? So
Yeah, because the young lady is organizing to try to create a union so they can just get a living wage. That's the whole thing, where I think I can't remember. You're right. I think it was a hotel or something. They were trying
not
to
sure.
unionize and they're walking the picket lines. And it's also very interesting because the little brother, and they don't see, he doesn't understand what she's doing. Why are you doing this? It's such a losing cause, but she's not
Yeah.
doing it for herself. What's the saying where I'm going to plant a tree, but I may never sit under. I may not
Oh,
live long enough to enjoy its shade. That is part of like what people do, to try to make things better for other people. So okay, all right. So real quick, anything you want to plug about the Boys and Girls Club? Anything that's happening at your sites
yeah.
that you want to just kind of uplift and let people know about, so we can.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, this is our Youth of the Year time, right? And so we're right in the midst of, so Youth of the Year is a program we do. So essentially we have 8 club sites, and they get to pick a youth leader, someone who's come to the club for, over 4 years, a young person that's demonstrated leadership, civic engagement. And so right now, for the last few months, they've been designated by their club, and they've been going through this process of creating essays and speeches. And so, again, we're right in the middle. They just conducted these interviews, and we're moving to the final round. And so, again, March 7th, I believe, is the date. Navy Pier, we're having our big event. We have 5 finalists. We're going to go on stage and essentially, give a great speech about, the challenges they may have faced in life and how they've overcome them, and how the Boys and Girls Clubs and the mentors at these sites have kind of really been a big part of them achieving their success so far in life, right? And so that's our big event coming up, Youth of the Year at Navy Pier. So definitely, bgcc.org. If people are interested, you can go check it out. Maybe come see the event if you're interested in seeing 5 wonderful young people kind of tell their story on stage. And again, the work continues, right? We're opening a site in Fort Heights, which we're excited about. As you know, Luis, you were working with us, we had to close that site. Fort Heights is a community that's very impoverished. They have no youth programs out there, so we're excited. In March, we're going to head back out there and provide some after school programming for them. So a lot of big things going on. A lot of big things.
That's amazing. Well, our time's coming to an end. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Angel was a little nervous, wasn't sure if it was gonna, but you did great. And
Thank you.
admire. I mean, I think that we'll continue to do the good work and continue. And this won't be the last time I have you on, because I have a couple other movies I think I would love for you to watch and we can
Yeah.
discuss.
Well, now you piqued my interest, so now, yeah, we have to keep going.
All right. Thank you for being part of episode 2 of Gumshoe Studios. We continue to do more good stuff, and we'll stay tuned. And then this will be out soon, and then we'll just keep trucking. But thank you for all the great work that you do and the people that you serve. And I think that's the
Thank
most
you.
important thing, that we serve and we try to
Absolutely.
do the best we can with what we're given. All right, and that's a wrap. Anything else? Any last words? Any last thoughts? You got 3 seconds.
No, just yeah, keep doing the good work yourself, man. You're a good guy. I appreciate you having me on here, and good luck with everything.
All right, guys. So until next time.